Okay, let's unpack this interesting situation. Sometimes the saying goes, the wolf comes in sheep's clothing.
Right?
But
Yeah.
sometimes the wolf just comes as a wolf.
And that line, it's striking, isn't it? It's actually a paraphrase from Justice Antonin Scalia way back in '88.
And now it's popped up in a really big new legal fight.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is who's using it. It's National Public Radio, NPR, along with 3 public radio stations down in Colorado.
Uh,
They've gone and filed a federal lawsuit.
a lawsuit specifically against the Trump administration.
Yeah.
And the heart of it, really, is that the administration put out an executive order trying to cut off all the money that Congress had already specifically set aside for public broadcasting. We're talking the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, CPB, and by extension, NPR and PBS.
And they haven't been shy about why. They're pointing fingers, talking about a, quote, woke agenda.
Yeah, exactly. So for this deep dive, we're going straight to the source material, well, a transcript that discusses the actual lawsuit filing.
Yeah.
Our goal here is to really dig into what NPR is claiming, understand the administration's reasoning, their justification for this, and sort of unpack the key legal arguments that are in play.
Get past the headlines, see the actual legal strategy.
Exactly. All right, so let's start with the administration's move. This executive order, what did it actually say? What was the action?
Okay, so it dropped on May 1st, and the title itself is, well, pretty loaded. Ending taxpayer subsidization of biased media.
Wow, okay. Straightforward.
Yeah, no kidding. The order lays out the administration's view really clearly. They see NPR and PBS content as basically not fair, not accurate, not unbiased.
And the woke agenda line is in there.
Oh, yeah. They explicitly accuse them of pushing a woke agenda that's central to their stated rationale.
And I remember the source mentioning something about the current media landscape argument, too.
Exactly. The order argues that, look, it's not 1967 anymore when the CPB was created. Today, the argument goes, the media world is abundant, diverse, and innovative. So based on that, the order says government funding is outdated and unnecessary.
Okay, outdated and unnecessary. But there was another part to that.
Yes, and corrosive to the appearance of journalistic independence. That's the kicker.
Corrosive to the appearance. Interesting phrasing. So what did the order actually tell people to do?
It directly instructed executive departments and even the board of the CPB itself to stop the flow of federal funding to NPR and PBS. Just cut it off.
Okay, so that's the administration's action and reasoning. But the money itself, the funding structure for public radio, it's a bit complicated, isn't it? It's not like the president just signs a check for NPR directly.
No, not at all. And that's a really critical point in the lawsuit. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting, CBD, it's actually a private entity.
Right, not a government agency.
Exactly. Congress created it, and Congress is the one that allocates the funds, about $500 million a year currently.
Okay, so Congress allocates $500 million to this private entity, CPB. How much of that actually gets to NPR?
Well, according to the lawsuit, NPR gets around $11 million a year from CPB.
$11 million out of their whole budget.
Yeah, and the source points out that's actually only about 2% of NPR's total annual operating budget.
Wow, okay, just 2%. That seems almost symbolic given the focus on cutting it entirely.
It does seem disproportionate, yeah.
So where does that 2%, that $11 million, actually go? What does NPR use it for?
The lawsuit explains it's primarily for infrastructure, basic essential stuff, like maintaining the radio stations, the transmitters, the equipment that keeps local stations on the airwaves across the U.S. It's about the delivery system.
Gotcha. So less about, say, paying reporters for specific stories and more about the pipes and wires needed to broadcast anything, especially for the local stations.
Pretty much, yeah. Supporting that network infrastructure.
Okay, so let's recap. Administration issues an order, citing bias, targeting funds Congress gave to a private body, CPB, which uses a small slice of it for NPR's basic infrastructure.
Right.
And now, NPR plus these 3 Colorado stations are suing. So, who exactly are the plaintiffs? Where did they file this thing? And what outcome are they looking for?
The plaintiffs. National Public Radio and those 3 Colorado public radio stations, they filed the suit in the federal court for the District of Columbia.
Makes sense. And they're asking for?
They're seeking what lawyers call declaratory and injunctive relief.
Okay, break that down. What does that mean in plain English for you, the listener? What do they want the judge to do?
Okay, so declaratory means they want the court to formally declare that the president's executive order is unconstitutional, basically illegal.
That's flat out say it's invalid.
Right. And then injunctive relief means they want the court to issue injunctions, orders, both preliminary and permanent, that would physically stop the administration, the defendants in the case, from actually carrying out the order.
So block them from cutting the funds.
Exactly. Stop them from implementing it, enforcing it, and the lawsuit specifically asks for an order saying the money Congress allocated cannot be withheld.
Got it. Declare it illegal, stop them from doing it. Now, the source mentioned something about the speed or the initial approach they took.
Yeah, it noted they didn't go for a TRO, a temporary restraining order, right out of the gate.
Which is usually the super fast emergency option.
Right. So the thinking might be that they expect the court to move pretty quickly anyway, maybe consolidate the arguments for the preliminary and permanent injunctions, possibly within, say, a month or so.
Okay.
And look, given the players involved, NPR, the administration, and the constitutional questions, everyone kind of expects this could move fast, potentially up to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, maybe even the Supreme Court, relatively quickly.
Yeah, that makes sense for a case like this. High stakes, fundamental questions.
Okay.
Let's get into the meat of the lawsuit itself, the legal arguments. The source says 4 counts.
That's right. 4 specific legal claims they're making. And 3 of them, the majority, are based on the First Amendment.
Okay, the First Amendment, freedom of speech territory. Let's break those down. What's the main thrust?
The big one, the one they seem to be leading with, is viewpoint retaliation.
Okay, retaliation based on viewpoint.
Yeah. The argument is basically the administration tried to cut our funding because they don't like our content, because they disagree with our viewpoint, which they've explicitly labeled left-wing propaganda.
And they're pointing to the executive order itself as proof.
Absolutely. The lawsuit highlights the language in the order, plus the fact sheet and press release that came with it. They say, look, these documents openly target NPR and PBS based on the president's stated view that the content isn't fair or unbiased.
So the argument is the government can't punish speakers just because it dislikes their message. And here, they're saying the punishment cutting funds is directly linked to the message.
Precisely. They're arguing the retaliatory motive isn't subtle here. It's right there on the surface. It's overt.
Okay, that's viewpoint retaliation.
Right.
What are the other First Amendment claims?
There's also a claim based on the right of association.
Right of association. How does cutting funding relate to that?
Well, the lawsuit argues that the administration's actions interfere with NPR's right to connect with its members, its viewers, its listeners.
Okay.
And sort of the collective right of those people to associate with NPR and receive its views.
So the idea is that by attacking the infrastructure funding, the money that keeps the stations on the air,
right,
the administration's trying to hinder NPR's ability to actually reach its audience, which in turn damages that association.
Exactly. If you can't broadcast effectively because the transmitters aren't maintained, which is what that CPB money helps with, it harms the ability of the audience to associate with NPR to get the programming and NPR's ability to foster that connection.
Oh, okay. It's about the practical ability to associate and express. Makes sense. So viewpoint retaliation, right of association. What's the 4th legal count?
The 4th one brings in the 5th Amendment and also the Administrative Procedures Act, the APA. This is the due process argument.
Due process. Okay.
Here, the lawsuit claims that these funds, allocated by Congress for a specific purpose, represent a kind of property right.
A property right for NPR.
Or at least for the public broadcasting system, channeled through CPB. And the argument is that the executive branch can't just swoop in and take that away unilaterally by executive order without following proper legal procedures.
So taking away the money violates the 5th Amendment's guarantee that the government can't deprive you of property without due process of law.
That's the argument. And they also invoke the Administrative Procedures Act, which sets rules for how federal agencies have to behave when they make decisions like this. They're saying the order didn't follow those rules. It was arbitrary, maybe capricious.
Okay, so they're hitting it from multiple angles. First Amendment speech and association, 5th Amendment property and process. It sounds like they're bringing out some serious legal precedents. The source mentions specific quotes. Let's go back to that Scalia line.
Yeah, the wolf comes as a wolf, quote. It's from his dissent in a 1988 case, Morrison v. Olson.
Right.
And the lawsuit uses it to hammer home that point about the administration's intent being obvious.
Like, we don't even need to dig deep to see the retaliation here. It's
Yeah,
right there.
exactly. By being so explicit about the content, the woke agenda, the lawsuit argues the administration made its retaliatory purpose plain as day. They're not disguising the motive.
It's a powerful rhetorical tool in a legal argument. What other quotes are they using?
Another really significant one is from a landmark 1943 Supreme Court case, West Virginia Board of Education v. Burnett.
Oh, the flag salute case.
That's the one. And the famous line is, "If there is any fixed star in our constitutional constellation, it is that no official high or petty can prescribe what shall be orthodox in politics, nationalism, religion, or other matters of opinion."
Or force citizens to confess by word or act their faith therein.
Such a foundational statement about American liberty. Absolutely. And the lawsuit wields it to say, look, when the administration cuts funding because it deems NPR's content biased or not the right kind of viewpoint, that's the government trying to do exactly what Burnett forbids.
It's trying to prescribe orthodoxy.
Precisely. Trying to dictate what's acceptable opinion in the public sphere, especially in media. The source even notes that this Barnett quote was just used recently by a judge in another case involving government pressure, showing it's still very much alive as a principle.
And there was a more recent case mentioned, too, from just last year.
Yes, Moody v. Netchoice. The lawsuit quotes the Supreme Court from that case saying, "It is no job for government to decide what counts as the right balance of private expression to unbias what it thinks is bias."
Rather than to leave such judgments to speakers and their audiences.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah, so the lawsuit basically throws the administration's own stated justification back at them, using the Supreme Court's words from just last year.
So the administration says, we're doing this because NPR, PBS are biased, and the lawsuit says the Supreme Court literally just said it's not the government's job to try and unbiased expression based on its own opinion.
Exactly. It frames the administration's action as directly contradicting this very recent Supreme Court guidance. It's a powerful counter.
This all seems tied up with why public broadcasting was set up the way it was in the first place. The source mentioned the history.
It did. The lawsuit makes a point of going back to 1967, the Public Broadcasting Act, the creation of the CPB.
And Congress's goal back then wasn't just funding, right? It was about structure.
That's key. According to the lawsuit, Congress had two main aims. Yes, support independent public broadcasting, but also, critically, to shield public broadcasting from extraneous interference and control, and to insulate it from government interference.
Insulated from government interference.
Yeah.
So the lawsuit is framing this executive order as exactly the kind of political meddling Congress wanted to prevent.
That's precisely the argument. They portray the CPB not as some executive agency that answers to the president, but as a creature of Congress, specifically designed for independence. So an executive order telling it how to handle its funds based on the president's view of content bias is positioned as an executive overreach into territory Congress deliberately walled off.
It really highlights that tension between the branches of government.
Right.
Now, aside from the legal points, how does the lawsuit talk about NPR itself, its role?
It describes NPR pretty straightforwardly as a vital source for news and cultural programming.
Does it mention specific shows people would recognize?
Yeah, it gives examples, the big news programs like Morning Edition, All Things Considered, but also other well-known stuff like Planet Money or Tiny Desk Radio for music.
Okay, showing the breadth.
Yeah.
And does it mention reach? How many people listen?
It does. It throws out a statistic. More than 43 million Americans get news or information from NPR every week.
43 million. That underscores its significance in the media landscape.
Definitely makes the point that this isn't some fringe operation.
And finally, the lawyers. The source mentioned who's representing NPR.
Yeah, it names the law firm Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher, and specifically points out a couple of well-known attorneys, Ted Brose and Miguel Estrada. Real heavy hitters.
Okay, so Gibson Dunn is handling this. So let's try and tie this all together. We have an executive order aiming to defund public broadcasting, using explicit claims of bias and a woke agenda as the reason.
Right, targeting money Congress specifically allocated.
And then we have this lawsuit from NPR and others pushing back hard, arguing First Amendment violations, viewpoint retaliation, hindering association, plus Fifth Amendment due process issues.
Yeah, and they're using some really powerful legal ammunition. That Scalia Wolf quote to show the intent is obvious, the Barnett no orthodoxy principle, and that very recent Moody v. Netchoice language directly refuting the government's role in unbiasing media.
All while grounding their argument in the history and purpose of the CPB. The Congress set it up specifically to be independent of this exact kind of executive pressure.
Exactly. It sets up a major clash over free expression, the separation of powers, and the role of publicly supported institutions. And for you, the listener, it matters because it touches directly on the independence of media you might rely on and how far the government can go in using funding to influence content based on perceived bias.
It absolutely raises profound questions. And here's maybe a final thought for you to chew on, building on all this. The lawsuit forcefully argues the government shouldn't be the arbiter of fair or unbiased expression, especially using the power of the purse. So considering that argument, what does this whole case reveal about that really tricky balancing act between providing public funding for media and ensuring both the reality and, just as importantly, the appearance of journalistic independence in our increasingly fragmented and polarized media world? Something to think about.